This is a 2-for-1 video. I make this Hoosier step saver based off of this plan by Ralph Bagenal. And I further review and demonstrate my new Shopsmith Mark 7. To get the project started, I've laid out all the cuts and labeled them with blue tape according to the project plan. Next, I'm going to cross cut these to rough length and true up the edges. This is yellow birch that I bought at Menards, and I think it's worth taking a look at this piece of wood. I first noticed that there was this grain flaking up, and if I catch the light just right, you'll probably be able to see it. And then I noticed on the other side there seems to be some sort of split or something kind of down the middle. And now that I've cross-cut it, we can see that there's some splitting here, and I'm assuming that's due to improper drawing procedures. Now luckily I was able to lay out my pieces to dodge that. This sort of runs right down the middle here, and my stretcher here and my stretcher here kind of dodged that. I need to prepare my work pieces for the seat. I'll have to glue up several boards in order to get the width that I need. And I'll be rip cutting them on my new Shopsmith Mark 7. On my old Shopsmith Mark 5 Model 510, I was capable of getting glue line rip cuts with a full kerf combination blade. This Shopsmith Mark 7 came with a thin kerf general purpose blade, but it seems to be pretty high quality with a really nice thick plate. So I'm going to see if I can get those high quality rip cuts on the new machine. Now part of this will be up to me. I need to feed the workpiece through without stopping and at a smooth, even rate. Yeah, that's going to be a glue line ready rip cut for sure. Okay, I have my 8 stretchers that I ripped on the bandsaw, and actually the cuts are so clean right off the bandsaw I probably could just take a swipe or two with a hand plane and have these cleaned up and ready to go. But I want to put my new Mark 7 through as many challenges as I can early in the process here. So I'm going to demonstrate 2 techniques. The first technique is going to be with the gripper. This will allow me to put force downward against the fence and push it forward while also maintaining stability with this support leg. Now there is an added risk because I've removed the saw guard and installed my riving knife, but I think this gives some control advantage over the second technique I'll show. Because I'm working with 1.5 inch boards, I have another option using the Shopsmith safety kit. If it were any thinner than this, I would be really forced to use the gripper. So what I'll do is install the feather guard, and that'll keep the workpiece up against the fence at least until I get towards the end of the cut. And then I'll use the fence straddler pushing block, which straddles my fence and then hooks back here at the back and lets me push it through the cut. And since I'm not straddling the blade with the gripper, I'll put the saw guard back in. Okay, status update. I've got my 8 stretchers, 4 legs, 3 steps, and 4 brackets all cut the size. There is some cleanup sanding to do, but these are ready for joinery. And I've got the seat and the clamps, and it's time to take that out and cross cut it to the 14 by 14 dimensions. Okay, let's take a look at the carnage here. I've cut the mortises in 2 legs so far, and I had a pretty bad time on some of them. This one looks okay. On this one, the headstock slipped down, which caused it to take a huge bite downwards and then pull itself down. You can almost see a stair-stepping effect at the bottom of that. And then when it got to the bottom down here, it kicked itself outward and took a bite out of the wall. I had to tighten down that lock on the headstock way tighter than I thought I normally do, but that's what was required. And finally, when I got the headstock to stop slipping down, I'm getting some pretty clean holes. Now, on these next 2, I think I'm going to try a different technique. A few years ago, I bought the mortising kit for another project, but it was back ordered and took quite a long time to get to me, and I never ended up using the kit. But I'm going to use it now, so it'll be nice to compare the 2 methods, the spiral upcut bit router method and the hollow chisel mortiser. So I made a foolish attempt at mortising with this chisel straight out of the package. I don't know why I did that. Like any other hand tool, which is what this is, it needs to be sharpened. Yes, the bit in the center is powered, but I am forcing this chisel through the wood by hand. Here is the 1/2-inch chisel. I don't know if you could see the difference on camera, but I did try to hone away the milling marks that were on here from new. I don't know if you can see these milling marks, but you can probably hear it. That leaves a very serrated edge up here. Anyone who knows anything about hand tools or chisels, you're going to know that that's not going to create a very good edge. So this one's a little better. I got rid of a lot of the milling marks, but I was afraid to go too far because I don't want to change the geometry of this chisel. If I measure it, I'm still at 3/8 within the tolerance of this device. So I'm not too bad yet. So I'll install this back into the machine and give it another go. If it doesn't work, I'm going back to the spiral upcut router bit. Okay, sharpening did make a difference in the way the hollow chisel went into the wood, but it's still a lot of force. And I'm a believer that tools should not be forced. If I have to force a tool, that's a signal to me that either the tool is not operating correctly or I'm using the wrong tool for the job. So I'm going to go back to the spiral upcut bit to make these mortises. Here are my 8 stretchers, and I need to make a full tenon on each end of these stretchers. I'm going to tell you about a tool that I'm not going to use to make those tenons. That's the Shopsmith Master Tenon Jig. I bought this model off of eBay used several years ago. I used it once to try it out, and I brought it out again to use in this project. However, when setting it up, I realized that it's not entirely square to the table. I did take it apart and clean it up and re-wax everything, and I got quite a bit of grime and grit off of it, and it's more square now than it was, but there's something not right. It's probably square enough that I would go ahead and use it, but there's some other issues. I investigated the procedures to use this tenon jig, looking at both the manual and some online videos, and actually there's quite a bit of steps involved. So I've got the unit set up here. I would put my stretcher in, clamp it down with the toggle clamp, loosen the knob, move this over, and then line up my cut with the line. But when I was happy with how this lined up, I would, according to the procedures, turn on the machine, run it through, turn off the machine, pick the jig back up, bring it back, turn the workpiece around, turn on the machine, run it through, turn off the machine, pick the jig back up, bring it back, and then move on to the next workpiece. And when I had completed all those cuts on both ends, that would leave a little bit of extra here that I would have to remove. I would either have to cross cut that off or put it back in the jig, move it over a little, turn on the machine, run it through, turn off the machine, flip it around, turn on the machine, run it through, turn off the machine, pull it back, flip it over, and again and again and again until I'd cleared the waste on all 8 tenons on both sides. But that would only give me an open tenon. I need a full tenon. So what I would do next is move the tenon jig to the right hand side of the machine, flip the unit, then I'd have to unscrew this bracket and move it over to these holes, and then I would be clamping the workpiece at the edge here so that when I pushed it through I wasn't cutting into my tenon jig, of course. But anyway, line it up with the board clamped down, run this cut through, turn it around, run the cut through, of course turning the machine off every time according to the instructions, flip it over, run it through, get all these done, and then I would still have probably a little bit of waste left that I'd have to come back and move the jig over a little bit and then run it through again 32 times because it's 8 stretchers times 2 ends times 2 sides. So that just to me seems like a lot of turning the machine off and on and changing configurations on this with not a very accurate way to set it up other than to mark a line and then cut to the line. So instead I'm going to use a dado stack method to cut these full tenons, which is what the plan calls for anyway. This little thing's going back in the drawer for probably another 5 years. So here's the result using the dado stack, 8 perfectly formed tenons on that side and an 8 identical set on this side. And that was much quicker than using the master tenon jig, in my opinion. I have the two sides glued up and sanded, and I also have the steps made, including the tenon cut. Now I need to cut mortises in these rails as shown on the plan. Now the plan that Ralph Bagenal put together suggests making a template and using a handheld router to slot mortise these mortises. However, I want to put my Shopsmith Mark 7 to the test. So I'm going to attempt to make one of these sleds which lets you move the workpiece laterally rather than left and right. So you can make basically dados. And I'm going to be making a stopped dado, and overhead routing is perfect for that. So I've got my scrap of ping pong table, and I'm going to lay out a place where I want to put these two sliders directly off the table, glue it up, then I'll mount this fence squared up to the table and put some toggle clamps on here to hold the workpiece down. I think this will all make sense when I get it put together and start using it. So I'll check back with you then. Okay, I'm almost ready to route the mortises for the steps. I've built this temporary sled. I've got my toggle clamp locks down. I've marked out each mortise. This is the first time I've ever tried this technique. I don't really know how it's going to go. But I do really enjoy experimenting with new techniques that I find in books and things like that. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. We'll see. I have to say that's a pretty clean looking mortise. So it looks like this technique's going to work pretty good. So I'll do the other 5 the same way. The plans call for a 1/2 inch roundover on the top of the seat. I've got a 1/2 inch roundover bit set up here in my Shopsmith. I'm taking advantage of the Shopsmith double tilt. The remainder of the roundovers are going to be a 1/4 inch. Unfortunately, I had to run to Menards and pick up this CMT orange router bit with the 1/4 inch shaft. Now, I do have the 1/4 inch router bit collet, but I just want to let you know that this is an additional accessory that I had purchased for my other machine. It doesn't come with the Shopsmith Mark 7. The plan also calls for a 1/4 inch roundover on these 4 brackets on both sides. They're a little small and I'm not comfortable doing it on a pin router setup. I think that's having my hands just a little too close to the bit, and I probably also have to remove the guard in order to do that. So I've just double stick taped them to my bench here, and I've set up the roundover bit in my palm router. I've got all the woodworking done on all the pieces. I've put on a coat of Zinsser Seal Coat Shellac mixed 50-50 with denatured alcohol. Then I sand it with a superfine sanding sponge. Here I have Trans Tint Dark Vintage Maple mixed up, and I'm going to put a base coat layer on here. Hopefully the seal coat will make this penetrate in an even manner. Then once this is dry, I'll go over the top of that with a gel stain. I find that any brown gel stain is just fine. But what this does is add a little bit of yellow as a base coat, and then when I add the brown on top of that, it kind of gives it that depth of color that looks really good. Now I've got this mixed pretty thin, because I can always come back and add more. I got to work pretty quickly here because I am diluting it in denatured alcohol, and I've got shellac on here, so I don't want to hang out with my sponge and wipe off all the shellac. Okay, that's all that's really needed for that piece. And here's the gel stain going on. Alright, everything's done. I'm ready to assemble. I'll center the base onto the top. I'll add the metal brackets here in the corners, cover those with the wood brackets, and then I'll be done. Well, here it is, the Hoosier Step Saver, built from the plans by Ralph Bagenal. Standing this way, it makes a nice stool, and if I flip it over, I have a set of steps to help me reach those scrap pieces of lumber I store on a rack. I had a lot of fun building this project, and it was a great way to put my new Shopsmith Mark 7 through a test run. I got to try some new techniques that I've never done before, so I learned a lot. Well, that does it for this woodshop nerdery video. I'll see you in the next one.